Pack your gear and get out. You're off the team." Coach Sawyer Pendleton's voice cut through the afternoon sunshine streaming across the track, his short-sleeved polo damp with sweat as he jabbed his finger toward the school building. Tobias Hunt had just clocked 10.2 seconds in the 100-meter dash, but Pendleton's eyes were cold as winter. "I don't care what that stopwatch says. Attitude problems don't win meets." Behind him, 3 slower white athletes smirked, their times all hovering above 11 seconds. Tobias stood perfectly still in his green tank top and black shorts, watching his dreams get crushed by a man who had no idea that Olympic scouts had been timing every single one of his runs for the past month. Welcome to Frost Folktales. This is where we tell the stories of those who were underestimated, dismissed, and targeted, yet chose courage over silence. If these stories move you, subscribe and be part of a community that refuses to let them fade into the background. The fluorescent lights from the school building mixed with natural daylight as Tobias Hunt processed what he'd just heard. Around him, the rest of the track team had gone silent, their afternoon practice grinding to an uncomfortable halt. Soojin Kim, who'd been stretching near the long jump pit in her orange athletic top and black running shorts, straightened up with her mouth hanging open in complete disbelief. Coach Sawyer Pendleton adjusted his khaki shorts and crossed his arms, clearly enjoying the power he wielded over 17-year-old dreams. The afternoon sun caught the silver whistle hanging around his thick neck as he surveyed his handiwork. Colton Ashby, who'd just finished dead last in the time trials with an embarrassing 11.4-second run, was trying to hide a satisfied grin behind his water bottle. Weston Fairfield, barely faster at 11.2 seconds, stood next to him nodding along with whatever Pendleton was about to say next. "You heard me, Hunt." Pendleton's voice carried across the track with the confidence of a man who'd never been challenged. "Pack up your spikes and find yourself a new hobby. This is a championship program, not a charity case for kids who think running fast is enough." The words hit like physical blows. Tobias Hunt had dominated every time trial for 3 weeks straight. His 10.2-second 100-meter time wasn't just fast for a high school junior. It was fast enough to compete at state level, maybe even attract college scouts. But here he was, being dismissed by a coach whose idea of championship material apparently ran 11-second hundreds and came with the right skin color. Soojin Kim couldn't stay quiet anymore. She jogged over, her footsteps loud against the rubberized track surface. "Coach Pendleton, there has to be some mistake. Tobias just ran the fastest time anyone's posted all season. How can you cut the fastest guy on the team?" Pendleton's expression hardened as he turned to face her. "Miss Kim, if I were you, I would start worrying about my own performance rather than that of Hunt's. Expeditiousness, though an important consideration, is not the only one. It's about character, about culture fit, and about representing the school the right way attitude-wise." "Which attitude problem?" Soojin's voice rose with disbelief. "Tobias arrives early, stays late, helps the younger kids with their technique, never complains about extra training." "What are you even talking about?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fired starter's pistol. Pendleton's jaw worked silently for several seconds, his eyes darting between Tobias Hunt's calm expression and the growing crowd of teammates who'd stopped pretending to stretch and were now openly watching the confrontation unfold. "I don't have to justify my coaching calls to students." Pendleton spoke sharply, prickling with defensiveness. "Hunt is aware of his actions. The way you call into question everything I do, roll your eyes in meetings, and generally show disrespect for authority. Winning teams need discipline and togetherness, not individualists who think they're above the program." Tobias Hunt finally spoke, the storm in his chest notwithstanding. "Coach, never have I disrespected you or questioned your methods. I show up to every practice, complete every drill, obey every order. My only goal is to help this team win meets. Don't give me that innocent act. I've been coaching track for 15 years, and I know a disruptive influence when I see one." Your attitude affects team chemistry, and team chemistry wins championships. Individual times don't mean anything if the group falls apart. Across the track, other athletes were exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Marcus Thompson, a sophomore sprinter, whispered something to his training partner. Two senior distance runners had stopped their cool-down jog to watch. Everyone could see what was happening, but nobody seemed willing to challenge a coach who controlled their athletic futures. The afternoon sun was beginning to sink lower, casting longer shadows across the track surface as this bizarre trial continued. Tobias Hunt stood with his hands at his sides, his green tank top still dry despite having just run the workout of his life. His composure was remarkable for someone whose dreams were being systematically destroyed by a man who seemed to take pleasure in the process. Sojin Kim wasn't backing down. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something. "Coach, I've been keeping track of practice times this season. Should I read them out loud? Because the numbers don't lie about who's been performing and who hasn't." "Put that phone away immediately." Pendleton's voice cracked like a whip. "This is not a democracy, and this decision is final. Hunt is off the team effective immediately. Anyone who has a problem with that can join him." The intimidation helped. As other athletes weighed the consequences of speaking up, their soft murmurs of dissent died out. High school kids with college dreams. Pendleton was in control of the recommendation letters for the kids' success. It was clear who was in charge and what would happen if you disobeyed. Though publicly humiliated, Tobias Hunt continued to nod with dignity. He approached the bench of the team, which had his backpack by his street clothes. The rhythmic sound of his track spikes on the concrete was eerily exaggerated in the deafening silence of their practice session. "What's really interesting, you see," Pendleton remarked as Tobias Hunt took his leave. "College recruiters seek more than merely speedy timings. They want character, leadership, young men who can represent their programs with class. The speed without character is nothing." The irony was so dense, it could be sliced with a shot put. The coach was preaching about character while damaging a teenager's athletic career based on nothing but his own prejudices. Tobias Hunt slipped into his jeans and sweatshirt, taking his time. Before departing, Tobias Hunt surveyed the track one final time as he took his backpack on. This place was where he discovered his skill. It was also where he learned his legs could carry him faster than he had imagined. The red rubber oval had felt like home, a launching pad that led to college scholarships and maybe, just maybe, the Olympic trials. "Best wishes for your championship season, Coach." Tobias Hunt may not have spoken with a glint in his eye, but he spoke quietly with strength which, somehow, made Pendleton look smaller. Even though Pendleton was the captain, "I hope you receive what you truly deserve." He subsequently walked away into the exact parking lot of the school. Every step became harder than the last, but he held his head high and kept moving. He could hear Pendleton yelling from behind to restart practice like there was no tomorrow, and to concentrate on the athletes who wished to participate. "Tarry a little." Sojin Kim called out to him just before he reached the track. The woman runs with an angry attitude to meet the offender. "Tobias, this is not over. What just occurred was totally not right, and you know it." Tobias Hunt offered a feeble smile. "Thank you, Sojin. Pendleton is correct about one thing. This is his team, and he gets to decide who stays and who goes. I'll come up with something." "No, you won't figure something else out." She was almost whispering now, glancing back to make sure Pendleton wasn't listening. "You'll keep running, and you'll keep getting faster, because that man just made the biggest mistake of his coaching career. And when the truth comes out, everyone's going to know exactly who belongs on this track and who doesn't." As they walked together toward the parking lot, neither of them noticed the unmarked sedan parked across the street from the school. Inside, two men in blue suits were finishing up their notes from the afternoon's observation. Dr. Carlton Asante closed his stopwatch and shook his head slowly. His colleague, Another Olympic Development Committee scout was already reaching for his phone. What they'd just witnessed wasn't just an injustice. It was potentially the loss of a generational talent to the kind of systematic discrimination they'd been tasked with identifying and eliminating. Tobias Hunt's 10.2-second time had been hand-timed at 10:08, which would have broken the school record and ranked him among the top high school sprinters in the entire state. But Coach Sawyer Pendleton had no idea that his afternoon power play had just been documented by the very people who could change everything. The same Olympic scouts who'd been quietly monitoring Tobias Hunt's progress for weeks had just witnessed the most blatant case of discriminatory coaching they'd encountered in years. As Tobias Hunt disappeared into the parking lot, his track career seemingly over before it had really begun, the wheels of justice were already beginning to turn. Sometimes the end of one dream is just the beginning of something much bigger, and sometimes the people who try to destroy your future end up destroying their own instead. The afternoon sun continued to shine down on the track where mediocrity had just triumphed over excellence, but change was coming faster than anyone could imagine. In the office of Principal Harriet Edmonds, fluorescent lights buzzed as she fixed her professional red jacket, checking the list of students on her desk and the track team. Sunbeams streamed through the large window and glinted off the awards and certificates on her walls. One of the few black administrators in the district, she had witnessed discrimination often enough to identify it immediately, which is why every red flag went up in her experienced mind yesterday when the team cuts took place. The intercom called out to her, "Coach Pendleton is here to see you, Principal Edmonds. Bring him in," she answered, jaw set. Sawyer Pendleton, the coach, walked in with his blue jacket over the usual polo shirt. His walk suggested that he was not aware of the reason. His hair, which was gray and black, had been styled, and his prepared smile was the same one he used at parent meetings and school board meetings. "Good morning, Harriet," he says as he takes the chair across her desk. "Don't suppose this will take long. I have practice to prepare for." Leaning forward, Principal Edmonds clasped her hands on the desk. "Sawyer, can we speak about your roster moves, in particular about Tobias Hunt?" Pendleton's smile dropped a bit. "What about this guy? He ran a 100-meter dash in 10.2 seconds, Sawyer. No one on your squad is that fast. I don't know how, but he didn't make it." A note of authority crept into her voice from the years of battling the system. Pendleton shifted in his seat, his blue jacket rustling. "Times aren't everything, Harriet. You need to weigh the complete package: character, work ethic, teamwork. Hunt has attitude problems." "Attitude problems?" Principal Edmonds raised an eyebrow. "That's not really specific. His academic record displays a 3.7 GPA, perfect attendance, and no disciplinary actions." The coach's face began to redden. "Look, I've been coaching for 15 years. I know talent when I see it, and more importantly, I know when someone doesn't fit the culture we're building. Hunt just doesn't have what it takes to represent this school, and Colton Ashby does. With his 10.8 time and 2 suspensions for disrespectful behavior." Pendleton's mask began slipping. "Colton comes from a good family. His father donates to the athletic department. He understands commitment, discipline. These inner-city kids, they don't have that foundation, that structure at home." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Principal Edmonds felt her temperature rising, but her voice remained controlled. "These inner-city kids, Sawyer? Is that how you really see your students?" Realizing his mistake, Pendleton backtracked frantically. "That's not what I meant. I'm just saying that some athletes need more than natural speed. They need character, leadership qualities, and you've determined that Tobias Hunt lacks these qualities. Based on what exactly?" "Based on experience, Harriet. Based on knowing what it takes to win championships. Hunt might be fast, but speed without discipline is worthless." At the other end of the city at Sports Zone, a local athletic goods store, Tobias Hunt was busy stocking running shoes on the shelves. Tobias wore an orange polo t-shirt, dark jeans, and black running shoes. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling illuminated everything clearly as he arranged the latest Nike models, each pair representing a dream that was becoming increasingly unattainable. The sound of the front door chiming electronically never bothered him until he heard hello. Tobias? As he turned around, he saw Sujin Kim walking towards him, her expression obviously worried, just like him. She donned a red top and jeans, with her track team jacket slung over her arm. "Hey, Sujin," he said quietly while working. "What is your purpose here? I needed some time to talk to you about yesterday." As she said, "I know what Coach Pendleton did," she glanced around to see if they could be overheard. "What took place isn't right, and I think that you need to know something." Tobias paused with a running shoe in his hands. "Look, I appreciate you caring, but it's done. There's a chance the coach was correct. Perhaps I am not speedier than this." "Don't say that." Sujin's voice was fierce. "You're the fastest runner I have seen." Pendleton's actions toward Calder were nothing but discrimination. "You can't prove that," Calder said. Sujin pulled out her phone. "Actually, I can." She showed him a video from 2 weeks ago, filmed discreetly during practice. Coach Pendleton's voice was clear as he spoke to another coach. "I don't care how fast these urban kids run. They don't have the discipline or the family support we need. We're building champions here, not charity cases." Tobias stared at the screen, his grip tightening on the shoebox. "You recorded this?" "I've been recording for months, Tobias. This isn't the first time. Remember Marcus Williams from last year? He ran a 10.4, never made the team. Devin Crawford the year before that? Same story. Pendleton has been systematically cutting black athletes who outperform his white favorites." Tobias felt struck by the truth of it. Whether he was good enough, he spent the whole time questioning himself. He now realized that the very system was rigged against him. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked. "We need to tell you the truth. Someone needs to stop him." Coach Pendleton was getting more agitated in Principal Edmonds' office while being questioned. "Harriet, this is my program. I will never do anything to sabotage our chances in games. Have you ever learned success? Looking at your record, your team hasn't won a league championship in 3 years. Perhaps that's because you are eliminating your best athletes." Pendleton stood abruptly, his blue jacket stretched tight across his shoulders. "I don't have to listen to this. I have administrative support from the district level. My methods produce results." Results like last season's last-place finish in regionals? Those were growing pains. This year will be different. Not with Hunt on the bench. It won't be. Pendleton's voice elevated. These kids from broken homes, single moms, who don't know what commitment is, or if they do, they don't have the distance-running genes. They don't have the mental toughness genes to sprint under pressure. Hunt shouldn't be in the team. The principal stood up slowly, wearing a red blazer. "Sawyer, I will act as if you didn't just say those things in my office. But let me be very clear to you. This conversation is not finished with you. I will be closely reviewing your roster decisions." At Sports Zone, the front door chimed once again. At the same time, Tobias and Sujin looked up to see a tall, athletic black man in his 40s. He wore a fitted blue jacket over a shirt that stressed his strong build. Even at the middle age he had the ease of movement of a born runner. The man browsed the track spikes section, but Tobias noticed him watching their conversation. After a few minutes, he approached. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice warm but authoritative. "I couldn't help overhearing you talking about track. Are you runners?" Sujin nodded. "We're from Jefferson High." "Well, I am. Tobias here just got cut from the team despite being faster than anyone on the roster." The man's expression darkened. "Cut for being too fast? That's interesting. I'm Darius Pemberton." He extended his hand to Tobias. Tobias shook it, noting the firm grip. "Tobias Hunt. Nice to meet you, Mr. Pemberton. Just call me Darius." And that name might sound familiar, Because I ran in the Olympics back in '96 and 2000. Bronze medal in the 4x100 relay in Sydney. Tobias's eyes widened. He was shaking hands with an Olympic medalist. These days, I work as a community mentor, helping young athletes develop their potential. What events do you run, Tobias? 100 and 200-meter sprints mostly. I hit a 10.2 in practice last week. Darius whistled low. 10.2 as a high school junior? That's legitimate college scholarship time, maybe faster with proper training. That's what I keep telling him, Sujin said. But he got cut by his coach anyway. Let me guess, Darius said in a knowing voice. White coach? Told you that you had attitude problems or didn't fit the team culture? Tobias gazed in astonishment. How did you find out? I have witnessed it before, son. I think Darius looked around the store before looking back to Tobias. Tell me something. Are you fond of jogging? Above all else. And do you want to get better? I mean, really commit to becoming the athlete you could be? Absolutely. Darius smiled. Then meet me at Riverside Track tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. Bring running gear and an open mind. What do you mean? I mean, your high school coach might not recognize talent, but I do. If you're willing to work, I'm willing to train you. I've coached 3 athletes to Division I scholarships in the past 5 years. Tobias felt something stirring in his chest that he'd thought was dead since yesterday. Hope, you'd really do that? Son, athletic talent like yours doesn't come around often. Letting it waste away because of some narrow-minded coach would be a crime. Besides, Darius's expression hardened slightly. I don't like seeing young black athletes held back by people who should be helping them soar. Sujin grinned. This is perfect, and I'll keep documenting everything at school. If we can build evidence of the discrimination pattern, maybe we can get Coach Pendleton removed. Now hold on, Darius cautioned. Let's focus on developing Tobias first. Justice has a way of sorting itself out when the truth becomes undeniable. Tobias rang up Darius's new training equipment when the former Olympian leaned over the counter for a chat. Tobias, I'd like you to remember something. Your speed is a gift. You're not just fast. You are an exquisite example of excellence. You demonstrate what's possible when talent meets opportunity. Don't ever let a fool convince you that you don't deserve one. When Darius left, and the electronic door chime rang, his words still echoed in the bright shop. After the deep cut, Tobias was experiencing optimism for the first time. Sujin pressed his shoulder. Look, I told you it would work out. This is just the beginning. Tobias smoothed out his orange polo with renewed vigor. I begin training with an Olympic medalist tomorrow. Pendleton may think that he's ended my career, but just watch me. The sun in SportsZone's windows was brighter than normal and shone not just on the merchandise, but the renewed dreams of a young man who would not let discrimination extinguish their hopes. The first rays of dawn painted the public track in golden hues as Tobias Hunt arrived at 5:30 in the morning, his green tracksuit catching the early sunlight. The Central City Community Track sat empty except for a few early joggers, its 8 lanes stretching out like promises waiting to be fulfilled. Tobias adjusted his green jacket and matching track pants, breathing in the crisp morning air that carried the scent of dew-dampened grass and possibility. Darius Pemberton emerged from the parking lot, his athletic build evident even beneath his blue coaching jacket and black athletic pants. The former Olympic sprinter moved with the fluid grace of someone who had once been among the world's fastest humans. His weathered face broke into an encouraging smile as he approached Tobias, carrying a stopwatch and a clipboard filled with training notes. You ready to see what you're really capable of? Darius asked, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had stood on podiums and heard national anthems played in his honor. What Sawyer Pendleton did to you was criminal, but we're going to turn that injustice into fuel. Tobias nodded, feeling a mixture of nervous energy and determination coursing through his veins. After days of anger and disappointment, Being here felt like reclaiming something that had been stolen from him. The morning sunlight illuminated his face as he began his warm-up stretches, his movements fluid and purposeful. Darius set up his equipment along the track's edge, positioning cones and checking his digital stopwatch. "We're going to rebuild your technique from the ground up. Pendleton probably never taught you proper block starts or breathing patterns. Most high school coaches don't know what they're looking at when real talent shows up." As Tobias settled into the starting blocks, every muscle in his body coiled with potential energy. The track surface felt different beneath his spikes, more responsive than the worn-down lanes at school. When Darius called out "set," the world narrowed to this single moment of anticipation. "Go!" Tobias exploded from the blocks, his green tracksuit a blur against the morning light. His feet found their rhythm immediately, each stride eating up precious meters as he powered down the straightaway. The wind rushed past his ears, and for the first time since being cut from the team, he felt truly alive. Darius's voice cut through the morning air as Tobias crossed the finish line. 9.87. "Son, do you understand what you just ran?" Tobias slowed to a stop, his chest heaving but his eyes bright with disbelief. Under 10 seconds. He had just broken the 10-second barrier that separated good sprinters from great ones. The time would have won most high school state championships. "That's just the beginning," Darius said, making notes on his clipboard. "Your form still needs work, and your block start has room for improvement. By the time we're finished, you'll be running times that make college scouts fight over you." 30 minutes into their session, a red sedan pulled into the parking lot. Coach Luciana Ferretti stepped out, her red coaching polo and black coaching pants marking her as someone who took the sport seriously. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes held the keen intelligence of a coach who had developed dozens of state champions. "Darius called me last night," she said, approaching them with a firm handshake for Tobias. "I've heard about what Sawyer Pendleton did to you. That man's been a stain on this sport for years." Coach Ferretti had built Lincoln High's track program into a powerhouse, and her reputation for developing talent was legendary throughout the state. Her presence added another layer of legitimacy to what they were building. "I brought some equipment," she continued, pulling a bag from her car. "Starting blocks that actually work, some resistance bands, and timing gates that'll give us splits to the 100th of a second." As the morning progressed, Tobias felt his confidence building with each repetition. Coach Ferretti worked on his arm swing, while Darius focused on his stride length and frequency. The technical adjustments felt natural, as if his body had been waiting for proper instruction his entire athletic career. "Your natural talent is extraordinary," Coach Ferretti observed, watching Tobias complete another sub-10 run. "But what impresses me more is your coachability. You absorb instruction like a sponge and implement it immediately." Meanwhile, across town at Central High, Sawyer Pendleton was discovering the consequences of his discriminatory decision. His team's practice session was becoming a disaster of epic proportions. Colton Ashby, supposedly one of his top athletes, struggled to break 11 seconds in the 100 meters. His form looked labored in his school-issued red practice jersey and black shorts, each stride revealing the technical deficiencies that Pendleton had overlooked in favor of skin color. Weston Fairfield fared even worse, his long legs carrying him awkwardly down the track as if he were fighting against his own body. The morning sun highlighted the stark reality that these were mediocre athletes who had been elevated beyond their abilities solely because of racial bias. "Coach, I don't understand why my times are getting worse," Colton complained, his face flushed with exertion and frustration. "I've been training hard." Pendleton had no answers because he had never actually developed talent before. His coaching philosophy had relied entirely on excluding superior black athletes rather than improving the abilities of his chosen runners. Now, facing the prospect of actual competition, his limitations were becoming impossible to hide. In downtown Central City, investigative sports journalist Ingrid Larson was conducting interviews that would eventually bring Pendleton's house of cards crashing down. Seated in her bright office, wearing a professional red blazer and black slacks, she spoke with Marcus Williams, a former Central High sprinter who had been cut 3 years earlier, despite posting the school's fastest times. "Pendleton told me I had attitude problems," Marcus explained via video call, his voice carrying years of accumulated frustration. "Said I didn't fit the team culture." Meanwhile, white kids who couldn't break 12 seconds were getting scholarships. Ingrid's notebook filled with similar stories as she contacted athlete after athlete. The pattern was undeniable and well documented. Talented black sprinters, hurdlers, and distance runners had been systematically excluded while inferior white athletes received coaching, resources, and opportunities. "Did you ever consider filing a complaint?" Ingrid asked during another interview. "Who would listen?" responded former hurdler Jasmine Cooper. "Pendleton had connections throughout the district. We were just high school kids, going up against an established coach with 20 years of seniority." Back at the community track, Tobias was experiencing what proper coaching could accomplish. His third 100-meter run of the session clocked 9.82, a time that would have dominated any high school meet in the state. The improvement wasn't just physical. His confidence was transforming with each successful run. "The key is believing you belong here," Darius explained as they took a brief break. "Pendleton tried to convince you that you weren't good enough, but the numbers don't lie. You're already running times that would make you competitive at the college level." Coach Ferretti nodded in agreement, checking her notes. "I've coached for 15 years, and I've never seen raw talent like this. Your stride efficiency is naturally excellent, and your acceleration curve is textbook perfect." As the morning session concluded, Tobias felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced since being cut from the team. The green tracksuit that had started the day as just workout clothes now felt like a uniform of possibility. Every muscle in his body hummed with the satisfaction of hard work, paying immediate dividends. "Same time tomorrow," Darius said, packing up his equipment. "We'll work on your curve running and maybe experiment with the 200 meters. I have a feeling you're going to surprise yourself with what you can accomplish at that distance." The sun climbed higher as they prepared to leave, its rays illuminating a community track that had become the staging ground for justice. While Sawyer Pendleton's official team floundered without genuine talent, and Ingrid Larson's investigation gathered damning evidence of systematic discrimination, Tobias Hunt was discovering the true extent of his abilities under coaches who saw potential rather than skin color. The morning had begun with questions about what might be possible. It was ending with proof that excellence couldn't be suppressed forever, and that sometimes the most powerful response to injustice was simply refusing to be diminished by it. As Tobias walked toward the parking lot, his green tracksuit catching the strengthening sunlight, he carried with him something more valuable than fast times or technical improvements. He carried the renewed knowledge that his dreams were not only valid but achievable, and that the right support system could help him reach heights that discriminatory coaches had tried to deny him. The real training was just beginning, but already the foundation was solid. Justice was coming, one sub-10-second run at a time. The morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ingrid Larson's downtown office, casting bright rectangles across her organized desk. She sat in her red blazer and black slacks, surrounded by printed documents, her laptop screen displaying a video call interface. The fluorescent lights overhead eliminated any shadows as she prepared for what would become a day of devastating revelations. "Can you hear me clearly, Marcus?" Ingrid asked, adjusting her headset as a young black man's face appeared on her screen. Marcus Thompson, now a college sophomore, nodded from his dorm room. "Yes, ma'am. I still can't believe someone's finally looking into Coach Pendleton's behavior." Ingrid opened her notepad, pen ready. "Tell me about your experience with the track team 3 years ago." Marcus's expression darkened. "I ran a 10.4 in the 100-meter as a sophomore. Pendleton told me I didn't have the mental discipline for varsity competition. Meanwhile, Tyler Richardson made varsity running 10.8 times. Tyler was Coach Pendleton's neighbor's kid. Did Pendleton ever make specific comments about your race? Not directly, but he'd always talk about natural talent versus hard work. Whenever black athletes performed well, like we couldn't possibly have earned our speed through dedication. Ingrid typed rapidly, documenting every detail. This was the fourth similar testimony she'd collected in 2 days. The pattern was becoming undeniably clear. 15 miles across town, Dr. Carlton Asante sat in the Olympic Development Committee's regional headquarters, his professional blue suit pressed and immaculate under the bright conference room lighting. The walls were lined with photographs of Olympic champions, their achievements a testament to what proper development and fair opportunity could accomplish. "These recordings are extraordinary," Dr. Asante said, reviewing the footage on his tablet. 2 other committee officials, both wearing professional blue blazers, leaned in to watch the screen. The video showed Tobias Hunt exploding from starting blocks, his form perfect as he powered through a training run. The timer displayed an impossible number, 9.94 seconds, sub-10 consistently now, noted Sarah Chen, the committee's talent identification director. With proper coaching facilities and nutrition support, this young man could be looking at Olympic trials within 2 years. Dr. Asante paused the video, studying Tobias's technique. The footage Ms. Kim provided of Coach Pendleton's discriminatory comments aligns with similar reports we've received from other districts. This isn't an isolated incident. The third official, Michael Rivera, pulled up files on his laptop. "We've documented 17 cases of promising black athletes being excluded from programs across 3 states. The pattern suggests systematic bias rather than coincidental coaching decisions." Dr. Asante stood, walking to the window where natural daylight brightened the room further. "Initiate a formal investigation into Pendleton's program. I want 5 years of roster decisions, performance data, and any available witness testimony. This young man's potential cannot be wasted due to one coach's prejudices." Meanwhile, at the public track where Tobias had been training, the afternoon sun cast sharp shadows across the lanes. Tobias wore his green tank top and black athletic shorts, his breathing controlled despite having just completed another blazing sprint. Darius Pemberton clicked his stopwatch, a broad smile spreading across his face. 9.92, Darius announced, his blue coaching jacket catching the breeze. "Son, you just ran a time that would have qualified for Olympic trials in 1996. Tobias bent over, hands on his knees, processing the significance. 6 months ago, he'd been considered not good enough for his high school team. Now he was posting times that college seniors would envy. "The technique adjustments we've made are paying dividends," Darius continued, reviewing his notes. "Your start reaction time has improved by 0.03 seconds, and your acceleration phase is textbook perfect." Coach Luciana Ferretti approached from the sidelines, her red coaching attire vibrant in the sunlight. She'd been observing the training session, timing splits with her own equipment. "Darius, those splits are incredible," she said, showing her stopwatch. "Tobias, your 40-meter time would make college recruiters fight over you." What Coach Pendleton did wasn't just discrimination, it was athletic malpractice. Back at the high school, Sawyer Pendleton paced his office like a caged animal. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh light on his increasingly worried expression. He wore a blue polo shirt and khaki pants, but his usual confident demeanor had cracked. Something was wrong. He could feel it in the whispered conversations that stopped when he approached, in the way Principal Edmonds had been avoiding his attempts to schedule meetings, in the mysterious inquiries he'd received about historical roster decisions. His team's performance had become a public embarrassment. Last weekend's meet saw Colton Ashby finish 7th in the 100 meters with a disappointing 11.1 second time, while Weston Fairfield pulled up lame during the 200-meter semifinals. Other coaches had begun questioning his talent evaluation methods. Pendleton grabbed his phone, scrolling through recent emails. Nothing concrete, but the tone had shifted. The district's athletic director had requested comprehensive performance reviews for all programs. The State Coaching Association had asked for documentation of his recruitment and selection processes. His door opened without a knock. Soo-Jin Kim stood in the doorway, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp with knowledge. "Coach Pendleton, I wanted to discuss next season's training schedule," she said, though they both knew that wasn't why she was there. "What do you want, Kim?" Pendleton snapped, his paranoia making him reckless. "I wanted to know if you still think team chemistry is more important than actual speed." Soo-Jin replied, her voice steady, "Because I've been tracking our results, and we're getting destroyed by teams whose coaches prioritize talent over personal bias." Pendleton's face flushed red. "You need to focus on your own performance, instead of questioning my decisions. I've been coaching longer than you've been alive, and in all that time, how many black athletes have you developed into state-level competitors?" Soo-Jin asked pointedly. "Because the numbers tell an interesting story." She left before he could respond, leaving Pendleton alone with his growing dread. Back in Ingrid Larsson's office, her investigation had expanded beyond individual testimonies. Under the bright fluorescent lighting, she'd spread documents across her desk like a detective working a complex case. Phone records, meet results, roster changes, and recruitment patterns painted a damning picture. "The statistical probability of this being coincidental is virtually zero," she muttered, highlighting key data points. Over 5 years, Pendleton had cut or declined to recruit 23 black athletes. Of those, 18 had gone on to excel at other schools or in club programs. Her phone buzzed with another video call. This time, the caller was Jasmine Williams, a sprinter who'd been excluded from Pendleton's program 4 years earlier. "Ms. Larsson, I ran 10.3 as a sophomore," Jasmine explained from her college track facility. "Coach Pendleton said I lacked focus and discipline. I'm now ranked 3rd in my conference division and have a full scholarship to State University." "Did other athletes notice the pattern?" Ingrid asked. Everyone knew, but nobody talked about it openly. The few white athletes who spoke up got labeled as troublemakers. It was easier to stay quiet and hope someone else would say something. As Jasmine's story unfolded, Ingrid realized the scope extended beyond simple discrimination. Pendleton had created a culture of fear and complicity, where even well-meaning teammates remained silent rather than risk their own positions. Dr. Asante was reaching similar conclusions in his committee meeting. The bright conference room had become a war room, with evidence and documentation covering every surface. "We have testimony from 12 former athletes, performance data showing systematic exclusion of black talent, and recorded evidence of discriminatory statements," Dr. Asante summarized. "The question now is intervention strategy." Sarah Chen pulled up Tobias's latest training footage. "This young man represents exactly what we're trying to prevent: exceptional talent nearly lost to institutional racism. His current development trajectory suggests he was ready for elite-level training 2 years ago." "The broader implications concern me," Michael Rivera added. "If this is happening in one program, how many other talented athletes are being systematically excluded across the country?" Dr. Asante nodded grimly. "Which is why our response must be comprehensive. We're not just addressing one coach's bias, we're establishing precedent for how these situations will be handled going forward." He opened his laptop, beginning to draft formal communications. "I want surprise evaluations scheduled for next week. No advance notice to Coach Pendleton or the school administration. We document everything firsthand." The afternoon sun was beginning to set when Tobias completed his final training run of the day. The timer read 9.89 seconds, another personal best that would have shocked the track community if they'd known about it. "Son, you're ready," Darius said. his voice carrying a mixture of pride and anticipation. Whatever opportunities come your way, you've earned them through dedication and natural gifts that cannot be coached. Tobias looked across the track where he'd rebuilt his dreams after having them shattered. Think anyone will ever know what really happened? How close this came to never happening at all? Coach Luciana smiled, checking her own notes. Justice has a way of revealing itself, and talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. None of them knew that within days, the full weight of the Olympic Development Committee's investigation would descend on Sawyer Pendleton's program. They didn't know that Ingrid Larsson's exposé was already being reviewed by national sports publications, or that phone calls were being made to school district superintendents about systematic discrimination in athletic programs. But they could sense change coming. In Tobias's blazing speed, in the growing network of supporters, in the accumulating evidence of injustice, momentum was building toward a reckoning that would transform not just one young athlete's future, but the entire system that had tried to deny it. The investigation was deepening, and with it, the promise that truth and talent would ultimately prevail over prejudice and institutional bias. The afternoon sun blazed overhead as Sawyer Pendleton strutted across the track in his usual short-sleeved navy polo and khaki shorts, clipboard in hand, whistle gleaming around his neck. The bright sunlight cast sharp shadows across the pristine track surface where his hand-picked athletes were going through their paces. Colton Ashby and Weston Fairfield stretched near the starting blocks, their privileged confidence radiating even in the mundane ritual of pre-practice warm-ups. "All right, ladies, let's see some real speed today," Pendleton barked, his voice carrying that familiar tone of manufactured authority. "State championships don't win themselves." From her usual spot in the aluminum bleachers, Soojin Kim sat with her phone discreetly positioned, still documenting every practice session. The bright overhead sunlight created perfect lighting conditions as she watched Colton lumber through his stretches, his technique as sloppy as ever. Her jaw tightened, knowing that just across town, Tobias Hunt was probably shattering records under Darius Pemberton's expert guidance. The crack of starting pistols echoed across the facility as Pendleton put his athletes through their paces. Colton's first 100-meter dash clocked in at 11.2 seconds. Weston managed an unimpressive 11.4. The coach's forced smile grew more strained with each disappointing time, but he continued his charade of satisfaction. "Good effort, boys. We're building endurance, not just speed," Pendleton called out, though everyone present could hear the hollow ring in his voice. That's when the black sedan pulled into the visitor parking lot. Dr. Carlton Asante stepped out first, his imposing 6'3" frame clothed in an immaculate navy blue suit that commanded immediate attention. His presence radiated the kind of quiet authority that comes from decades at the highest levels of athletic administration. Two other officials emerged behind him, both wearing matching professional blue attire that marked them unmistakably as representatives of something far more significant than local high school politics. Soojin Kim felt her heart rate spike as she recognized the moment she'd been hoping for. Her phone was already recording as the three officials approached the track with purposeful strides, their expressions serious and professional under the bright afternoon sun. Sawyer Pendleton noticed them immediately. His predatory coaching instincts kicked in as he sized up the unexpected visitors, automatically shifting into his well-practiced charm offensive. He jogged over with exaggerated enthusiasm, extending his hand before they'd even reached the track's edge. "Gentlemen, welcome to Jefferson High's premier athletic facility," Pendleton declared, his voice taking on that oily quality he reserved for potential donors or media attention. "I'm Coach Sawyer Pendleton, and you've arrived just in time to witness some exceptional talent in action." Dr. Carlton Asante accepted the handshake with measured politeness, his keen eyes already scanning the practice environment. "Dr. Carlton Asante, Olympic Development Committee. These are my colleagues, Director Marcus Webb and Evaluation Coordinator James Morrison." The words hit Pendleton like a physical blow. though he managed to maintain his facade. Olympic Development Committee. His mind raced through possible reasons for their unannounced arrival, none of them particularly comforting. Olympic Development Committee, Pendleton repeated, his smile becoming more forced. Well, this is certainly an honor. I assume you're here to evaluate our program. We've been producing some remarkable results this season. Director Webb, a stern-faced man in his 50s, wearing a crisp blue blazer, pulled out a tablet and stylus. We're conducting a comprehensive review of regional athletic programs. We'd like to observe your current athletes and review your roster decisions for this season. Of course, Pendleton said, gesturing toward the track where Colton and Weston were preparing for another sprint. You're about to see some of the finest young talent in the state. These boys have been posting some incredible times under my guidance. As if summoned by his boastful words, Principal Harriet Edmonds appeared at the edge of the track complex. Her red administrative blazer was perfectly pressed, despite the afternoon heat, and her expression carried the weight of someone who had been expecting this moment. She approached the group with measured steps, her presence immediately shifting the dynamic. Dr. Asante, she said, extending her hand with professional courtesy. Principal Harriet Edmonds, I believe we spoke on the phone last week. The exchange sent another wave of anxiety through Pendleton's chest. They had spoken on the phone? When? About what? His smile faltered for just a moment before he forced it back into place. Principal Edmonds, Dr. Asante replied with a slight nod. Thank you for facilitating this evaluation. We're particularly interested in understanding the selection criteria used for this season's varsity roster. Selection criteria, Pendleton interjected quickly, are based on a comprehensive evaluation of athletic ability, team chemistry, work ethic, and competitive performance. It's a holistic approach that considers the athlete as a complete package, not just raw speed. Evaluation coordinator Morrison looked up from his notes, his sharp eyes fixing on Pendleton. We understand you had several promising candidates try out this season. Can you walk us through your decision-making process? Absolutely, Pendleton replied, his confidence building as he moved into familiar territory. Take Colton Ashby there. He pointed toward the track where Colton was settling into starting blocks. Solid fundamentals, excellent attitude, real team player. And Weston Fairfield, reliable, coachable, great family support system. The officials watched as Colton exploded from the blocks with his characteristic lack of form. His stride was uneven, his breathing labored, and his finish weak. The electronic timer displayed 11.1 seconds, a time that would have been mediocre even at the junior varsity level. Director Webb made a note without comment. Interesting. And what about athletes who didn't make the final roster? We understand there were some close decisions. Pendleton's throat tightened almost imperceptibly. Every decision was carefully considered. Some athletes, despite having certain physical attributes, lacked the intangible qualities necessary for success at this level. Intangible qualities, Dr. Asante repeated slowly, as if testing the phrase. Such as attitude, coachability, work ethic. Pendleton rattled off his familiar list. Raw speed means nothing if an athlete can't function within a team structure or follow coaching directives. From the bleachers, Soojin Kim watched the exchange with growing excitement. She could see Pendleton beginning to sweat despite the afternoon breeze, could observe the way his hands moved restlessly as he spoke. Her phone captured every moment as the net slowly tightened around the coach's elaborate deception. We'd like to review your evaluation records, Morrison said, pulling out an official request form. Times, performance metrics, behavioral assessments, the complete documentation for all athletes who participated in tryouts. Pendleton's stomach dropped. Documentation, records, the very things he deliberately kept vague or avoided creating altogether to hide his discriminatory practices. Of course, though I should mention that some of our evaluation process relies on subjective observation rather than just numerical data, he said, buying time. Athletic performance at this level involves so many variables that can't be quantified. We understand, Dr. Asante said calmly. However, we're particularly interested in one athlete who participated in your tryout process. Tobias Hunt. The name hung in the air like an accusation. Pendleton felt his carefully constructed facade begin to crumble as the three officials fixed their attention entirely on him. Principal Edmonds stepped closer, her red blazer bright under the afternoon sun, her expression unreadable but intent. Tobias Hunt, Pendleton repeated, his mouth suddenly dry. Yes, he participated in tryouts. Talented runner, but as I mentioned, there were significant concerns about attitude and coachability. Attitude concerns, Director Webb said, consulting his tablet. Can you be more specific about these issues? Pendleton launched into his well-rehearsed narrative, his voice gaining confidence as he recounted the fictional behavioral problems he'd invented to justify his decision. Disrespectful to coaching staff, resistant to instruction, disruptive influence on team chemistry. Despite his physical capabilities, he simply wasn't the right fit for our program culture. The three officials exchanged glances that Pendleton couldn't interpret. Dr. Asante reached into his briefcase and withdrew a thick manila folder. Coach Pendleton, I need to inform you that the Olympic Development Committee has been monitoring Tobias Hunt's progress for the past 4 months, Dr. Asante said, his voice taking on a formal gravity. We have extensive documentation of his training sessions, performance metrics, and behavioral observations. The words hit Pendleton like a freight train. 4 months of monitoring, documentation. His vision momentarily blurred as the implications crashed over him in waves. Monitoring. He managed to croak. Mr. Hunt has been training independently under the guidance of former Olympic athlete Darius Pemberton. Morrison continued, consulting his notes. During this period, he has consistently posted times that would place him among the top high school sprinters in the nation. Dr. Asante opened the folder, revealing page after page of timing data, photographs, and detailed reports. His current personal best in the 100-meter dash is 9.94 seconds. Achieved just last week under official observation. The numbers seemed to echo in Pendleton's ears. 9.94 seconds, a time that would not only dominate at the high school level, but qualify for serious collegiate consideration and potentially Olympic development programs. Meanwhile, his chosen athletes were struggling to break 11.2 seconds. There must be some mistake, Pendleton stammered, his usual composure completely shattered. Those times, they can't be accurate. If Tobias was capable of that kind of performance, I would have seen it during tryouts. According to our records, Mr. Hunt ran a 10.2-second 100-meter dash during your official tryout session, Director Webb said, reading from the official documentation. This time was witnessed by multiple athletes and recorded by at least one student on their personal device. Sojin Kim felt a surge of vindication from the bleachers. Her recordings, her documentation, her months of gathering evidence had reached the right people. A 10.2 at tryouts would have made him your fastest athlete by nearly a full second, Dr. Asante observed, his tone remaining professionally neutral despite the obvious implications. Can you explain why an athlete with such superior performance was excluded from your roster? Pendleton's mind raced frantically for an explanation that wouldn't sound like the obvious discrimination it was. Times can be misleading. There are equipment malfunctions, timing errors, environmental factors. What matters is consistency, and Tobias never demonstrated the reliable performance necessary for varsity competition. Interesting, Morrison said, making another note. Because our 4 months of observation show remarkably consistent improvement and exceptional performance under pressure situations. Principal Edmonds finally spoke, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had been preparing for this moment. Coach Pendleton, the school administration has been cooperating with this investigation for several weeks. We've provided all requested records, scheduling information, and access to student testimonies. The betrayal hit Pendleton like a physical blow. His own administration had been working against him, cooperating with an investigation he didn't even know existed. His eyes darted between the officials and Principal Edmonds, searching for some escape route that didn't seem to exist. Investigation, he repeated weakly. The Olympic Development Committee takes allegations of discriminatory practices very seriously, Dr. Asante explained, his voice maintaining its professional calm. When we receive reports of exceptional talent being systematically excluded from development opportunities, we investigate thoroughly. Reports from whom? Pendleton demanded, his composure finally cracking completely. Who's been making these allegations? Multiple sources, Director Webb replied. Students, parents, community members, other coaches. The pattern was difficult to ignore once we began examining the data. From the track, Colton and Weston had stopped their practice routine, sensing the shift in atmosphere. They stood near the starting blocks in their matching practice uniforms, suddenly aware that their positions on the team might not be as secure as they'd believed. Pattern, Pendleton said, latching onto the word like a lifeline. There's no pattern. Every decision I've made has been in the best interest of these athletes and this program. I've dedicated my career to developing young talent. According to our research, over the past 5 years, your program has had 14 African American athletes try out for the varsity track team, Morrison read from his comprehensive report. Of those 14, 0 have been selected for the final roster, despite several posting times that would have placed them among your top performers. The statistical reality hung in the air like an indictment. 14 athletes, 0 selections. The mathematical impossibility of such a pattern being based on merit alone was obvious to everyone present. Correlation doesn't imply causation, Pendleton said desperately, falling back on academic jargon to deflect from the obvious implications. Athletic programs require complex decision-making that goes beyond simple statistical analysis. Dr. Asante closed the folder and fixed Pendleton with a steady gaze. Coach, we have video documentation of training sessions, recorded statements from witnesses, performance data spanning multiple months, and testimony from athletes who have experienced discriminatory treatment. This goes far beyond statistical correlation. The mention of video documentation sent a fresh wave of panic through Pendleton's system. Video evidence, recorded statements. The scope of their investigation was far more comprehensive than he'd imagined possible. I want to see this supposed evidence, Pendleton demanded, though his voice lacked conviction. These allegations are serious, and I have a right to defend myself against false accusations. You'll have every opportunity to respond to the formal charges, Principal Edmonds said, her red blazer bright under the afternoon sun. The school board has scheduled a hearing for tomorrow morning where you can present your defense. Formal charges. School board hearing. The words hammered into Pendleton's consciousness as he realized that his carefully constructed world was collapsing around him in real time. From the bleachers, Sujin Kim continued recording, her phone capturing every moment of the confrontation she'd helped orchestrate through months of patient documentation. The bright sunlight created perfect visibility as justice finally began to unfold. This is all a misunderstanding, Pendleton said, his voice taking on a pleading quality that he'd never allowed himself before. Yes, I make tough decisions, but they're always based on what's best for the program. Sometimes talent isn't enough if an athlete can't fit into the team structure. Mr. Hunt's behavioral evaluations from his current training situation describe him as respectful, dedicated, coachable, and mature. Director Webb read from the official reports. His coach describes him as one of the most promising young athletes he's worked with in 20 years. The contrast was damning. Every excuse Pendleton had manufactured about Tobias Hunt's character was being systematically dismantled by professional evaluations from respected sources. Dr. Asante stepped forward, his imposing presence casting a shadow over Pendleton despite the bright afternoon sun. Coach, I'm going to ask you directly. Is there any legitimate athletic or behavioral reason why Tobias Hunt was excluded from your program? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Pendleton opened his mouth several times, but found no words that could bridge the gap between his fictional narrative and the documented reality. His elaborate justifications crumbled under the weight of evidence, leaving only the ugly truth he'd spent so much energy concealing. I made the best decisions I could with the information available, he finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. The Olympic Development Committee will be recommending that Mr. Hunt be immediately evaluated for our national program, Dr. Asante announced, his words carrying the authority of official policy. His talent and potential are exceptional, and he deserves every opportunity to develop at the highest level. The announcement hit Pendleton like a final nail in the coffin of his coaching career. Not only had his discriminatory practices been exposed, but the athlete he'd tried to destroy was being elevated to the highest levels of American athletics. As the officials began packing their materials and preparing to leave, Sawyer Pendleton stood alone in the center of the track he'd ruled like a personal kingdom, his short-sleeved polo now damp with sweat, his authority evaporating in the bright afternoon sun like morning dew. The reckoning had arrived. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of Jefferson High's main conference room, casting sharp rectangles of light across the polished mahogany table. Dr. Carlton Asante adjusted his blue suit jacket as he arranged manila folders with methodical precision. Each folder contained months of carefully documented evidence that would soon shatter Coach Sawyer Pendleton's carefully constructed facade. Principal Harriet Edmonds entered wearing her signature red blazer, her expression grave as she took her seat at the head of the table. The 3 school board members followed, their faces reflecting the seriousness of what they were about to witness. The overhead fluorescent lights hummed softly, illuminating every corner of the room where justice had been delayed for far too long. "Thank you all for gathering on such short notice," Dr. Asante began, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. "What we're about to discuss represents one of the most egregious cases of athletic discrimination we've encountered in our oversight capacity." He opened the first folder, revealing printouts of timing data that told an unmistakable story. The numbers seemed to glow under the bright lights, each statistic a damning piece of evidence against Sawyer Pendleton's corrupt coaching practices. "These are official timing records we've been collecting through our monitoring system," Dr. Asante continued, sliding the documents across the table. "Tobias Hunt's documented times over the past 8 months show consistent performance in the 10.1 to 9.9 second range for the 100-meter dash." Principal Edmonds leaned forward, studying the data with growing amazement. Her eyes widened as she processed what the numbers revealed about the athlete who had been systematically excluded from her school's track program. "Compare these results to the current team roster," Dr. Asante said, producing another set of documents. "Colton Ashby's best recorded time this season is 10.8 seconds. Weston Fairfield hasn't broken 10.9 seconds in any official competition. Yet both athletes maintained their positions on the team while Tobias Hunt was cut entirely." The school board members exchanged shocked glances, the mathematical impossibility of Pendleton's selections becoming crystal clear under the unforgiving light of objective data. The evidence painted a picture so stark that denial would be impossible. Dr. Asante reached for his laptop, the screen reflecting the bright conference room lighting as he prepared the next phase of his presentation. However, the timing data alone doesn't tell the complete story. We also have video evidence that reveals the true nature of Coach Pendleton's decision-making process. The room fell silent, except for the gentle whir of the laptop's cooling fan as Dr. Asante connected it to the wall-mounted display screen. The footage that began playing had been captured secretly by Sujin Kim, her steady hands documenting moments that would now serve as crucial evidence. On screen, Sawyer Pendleton's voice filled the room with its casual bigotry, his comments about attitude problems and work ethic taking on their true meaning when viewed alongside his treatment of white athletes who displayed far worse behavior. The contrast was so glaring that even the most skeptical observer couldn't miss the discriminatory pattern. These recordings were provided to us by a student athlete who witnessed Coach Pendleton's practices firsthand, Dr. Asante explained. The footage spans several months and shows a consistent pattern of differential treatment based solely on racial characteristics. Principal Edmonds pressed her hand to her forehead, the weight of institutional responsibility settling heavily on her shoulders. She had suspected something was wrong, but seeing the evidence laid out so systematically made her realize how deeply the corruption had penetrated her school's athletic program. A sharp knock interrupted the presentation as Ingrid Larson entered the conference room, her red professional attire complementing her serious demeanor. She carried a thick portfolio that seemed to promise even more damaging revelations about Pendleton's coaching tenure. "Forgive the interruption," Ingrid said, her investigative journalist instincts having led her to this crucial moment. "I believe my research will provide additional context to what you're discussing here today." She opened her portfolio, revealing a comprehensive investigation that stretched back 5 full years of Jefferson High's track and field program. The documents she spread across the table showed a pattern so systematic that it could only be described as deliberate discrimination. "I've documented 17 separate cases where exceptionally talented black athletes were either cut from the team, given reduced training opportunities, or forced to quit due to hostile treatment," Ingrid explained. "In every single case, less qualified white athletes retained their positions and received preferential treatment." The school board members studied Ingrid's research with growing horror, each case study representing a young person whose dreams had been crushed by institutional racism. The bright conference room lighting seemed to intensify the stark reality of what had been happening under their oversight. Dr. Asante nodded grimly as he reviewed Ingrid's findings. "This aligns perfectly with our own investigation. The Olympic Development Committee has been tracking similar patterns at schools across the region. But Jefferson High represents one of the most systematic examples we've encountered." Meanwhile, across town, at the public track, where redemption was being forged through sweat and determination, Tobias Hunt continued his training session with Darius Pemberton, completely unaware that his vindication was unfolding in real time. His green tracksuit moved fluidly as he exploded from the starting blocks, his form perfect under the natural morning sunlight. Darius clicked his stopwatch, his blue coaching jacket identifying him as the mentor who had refused to let talent be wasted. 9.87 seconds, he called out with barely contained excitement. "Tobias, do you realize what you just ran?" Tobias slowed to a jog, his breathing controlled despite the incredible speed he had just displayed. The morning air filled his lungs as he processed another breakthrough performance, each training session bringing him closer to the Olympic dreams that had never truly died. Back in the conference room, the evidence presentation was reaching its devastating climax. Dr. Asante had saved the most damning documentation for last, pulling out records that showed the full scope of Pendleton's corrupt practices. "We also discovered financial irregularities in the program's equipment purchases," Dr. Asante revealed. "Premium gear consistently went to underperforming white athletes, while talented black athletes were told budget constraints prevented proper equipment allocation." The conference room door opened with ominous timing as Sawyer Pendleton himself entered, having been summoned by Principal Edmonds under the pretense of a routine athletic department meeting. His blue jacket was already showing sweat stains despite the morning coolness, his instincts warning him that something had gone terribly wrong. Pendleton's eyes darted around the room, taking in the serious faces, the spread documents, and the undeniable atmosphere of official investigation. His usual arrogant confidence began evaporating as he realized he was walking into a carefully orchestrated confrontation. "Sawyer, please take a seat," Principal Edmonds said, her voice carrying none of its usual collegiality. We need to discuss some serious concerns about your coaching practices." Pendleton's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out a chair, his blue jacket feeling increasingly constraining as the walls of accountability closed in around him. The bright fluorescent lighting seemed harsh and accusatory, illuminating every nervous gesture and revealing the fear that was rapidly replacing his former arrogance. "I'm not sure what this is about," Pendleton said, his voice lacking its usual authority. "My program has been successful by any reasonable measure." Dr. Asante looked up from his documents with the calm expression of someone who held overwhelming evidence. "Coach Pendleton, we've been monitoring your program for 8 months. We have comprehensive data showing that you've systematically excluded the most talented athletes based solely on racial bias." The color drained from Pendleton's face as he realized the true scope of what he was facing. This wasn't a routine evaluation or minor complaint. This was a full investigation by the Olympic Development Committee, with evidence that could destroy not just his coaching career, but his entire professional reputation. "That's absolutely ridiculous," Pendleton stammered, his desperate damage control already showing signs of panic. "I make decisions based purely on athletic merit and team chemistry. Race has nothing to do with my coaching philosophy." Ingrid Larson looked up from her notes with the sharp gaze of an investigative journalist who had uncovered systematic corruption. "Then how do you explain cutting a 10.2-second sprinter while keeping athletes who can't break 10.8 seconds? Pendleton's mouth opened and closed without producing coherent words, his usual arsenal of vague explanations crumbling under the weight of objective evidence. The bright conference room lighting seemed to intensify his growing panic as he realized that his carefully constructed justifications were falling apart. Dr. Asante leaned forward, his official authority filling the room with undeniable gravity. "Coach Pendleton, based on our investigation, the Olympic Development Committee is formally recommending Tobias Hunt for immediate inclusion in our national training program. His documented performances qualify him for full scholarship support and direct coaching from former Olympic athletes." The announcement hit Pendleton like a physical blow. The realization that his discrimination had failed completely washing over him in waves of humiliation and defeat. Everything he had tried to prevent was now happening with official Olympic backing, making his efforts not just cruel, but utterly pointless. At the public track, Tobias completed another blazing sprint, his natural talent finally receiving the recognition and support it had always deserved. Darius Pemberton smiled with pride as he watched his student achieve times that would soon earn national attention. In the Jefferson High parking lot, Colton Ashby and Weston Fairfield sat in uncomfortable silence, finally understanding their role in perpetuating an unjust system. The truth about their coach's practices had shattered their illusions about merit and fairness, forcing them to confront their own complicity in discrimination. The bright morning sun illuminated a school where truth had finally triumphed over prejudice, where evidence had overwhelmed denial, and where a young man's dreams were about to receive the support they had always deserved. Tuesday morning arrived like any other day. The sun cast long golden rays through the windows of Roosevelt High as students shuffled through the hallways, backpacks slung over shoulders, conversations buzzing about homework and weekend plans. Tobias Hunt walked through the front doors wearing his favorite green shirt and dark jeans, his mind already focused on the calculus test waiting in third period. After months of underground training with Darius Pemberton, he had developed a routine of quiet acceptance. His dreams hadn't died, but they had shifted to a longer timeline, one that didn't depend on Coach Sawyer Pendleton's approval. The morning sun streamed through the overhead skylights as Tobias navigated the familiar corridors. Students nodded respectfully as he passed. Word of his incredible training times had spread quietly through the school, despite Pendleton's attempts to keep him invisible. His locker combination clicked smoothly under his fingers as he grabbed his textbooks, completely unaware that his world was about to transform forever. The intercom crackled to life just as first period ended. Tobias Hunt to the principal's office immediately. Tobias Hunt to Principal Edmonds' office. His stomach dropped slightly. In his experience, being called to the principal's office rarely meant good news. Students in the hallway turned to stare as he made his way toward the administrative wing. Soo-Jin Kim caught his eye from across the corridor, her expression unreadable but intense. She gave him a small nod that seemed loaded with meaning he couldn't quite decipher. Principal Harriet Edmonds stood waiting outside her office, wearing a sharp red blazer that commanded respect under the bright fluorescent lighting. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Tobias caught something different in her eyes. Something that looked almost like anticipation, mixed with satisfaction. "Tobias, thank you for coming so quickly," she said, her voice carrying unusual formality. "We have some very important people who need to speak with you." She gestured toward the larger conference room adjacent to her office. Through the glass walls, Tobias could see several figures seated around the polished table, all illuminated by the natural skylight streaming from above. His heart began to race, though he couldn't identify why. Principal Edmonds opened the door, and Tobias stepped into what felt like a completely different reality. Dr. Carlton Asante sat at the head of the table, wearing an immaculate blue suit that spoke of serious authority. His presence commanded the room even while seated. Beside him, Darius Pemberton wore his familiar blue coaching jacket, but his expression was more formal than during their training sessions. Coach Luciana Ferretti occupied another chair, her red coaching attire bright against the neutral conference room colors. "Please sit down, Tobias," Dr. Asante said, his voice carrying the weight of someone accustomed to making life-changing announcements. Tobias lowered himself into the indicated chair, his mind racing through possibilities. Had something happened to his family? Was there some problem with his academic standing? The formal atmosphere made his palms sweat, despite the comfortable room temperature. Dr. Asante leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Tobias, I'm Dr. Carlton Asante from the United States Olympic Development Committee. We've been watching you for quite some time." The words hit Tobias like a physical blow. Olympic Development Committee. The phrase seemed to echo in the bright conference room, bouncing off the windows and settling into his consciousness like something from a dream he'd forgotten having. "Watching me?" Tobias managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "For the past 8 months, Dr. Asante continued, we've been monitoring your progress and investigating reports we received about discriminatory practices affecting your athletic development. What we've discovered has led to some very significant decisions." Principal Edmonds took a seat, her red blazer a splash of color against the professional atmosphere. "Tobias, everything is about to change, but first, you need to understand what's been happening behind the scenes." Dr. Asante opened a tablet and turned it toward Tobias. The screen displayed detailed timing records, video footage, and official Olympic Committee letterhead. "We have documented evidence of your consistent sub-10-second 100-meter performances. We have recordings of discriminatory statements made by Coach Sawyer Pendleton. We have testimony from multiple witnesses regarding systematic bias in team selection." Tobias stared at the screen, his mind struggling to process the implications. Months of secret documentation, official Olympic Committee involvement, the scope of what had been building around him while he focused simply on running and surviving felt overwhelming. Darius Pemberton spoke for the first time, his voice gentle but firm. "Son, what you've endured isn't something any athlete should face, but your talent and your character through all of this has caught the attention of people who can actually do something about it." Coach Luciana Ferretti leaned forward in her red coaching attire. "Tobias, I've been coaching for 15 years. I've seen maybe 3 athletes with your natural ability in that entire time. What happened to you was criminal negligence of world-class talent." Dr. Asante reclaimed control of the conversation. "As of this morning, Coach Sawyer Pendleton has been suspended pending termination. The school district is conducting a full investigation into discriminatory practices. More importantly for your future, the Olympic Development Committee is formally offering you immediate placement in our elite training program. The words seemed to float in the air. Tobias heard them, understood their individual meanings, but their collective impact felt too massive to fully comprehend. Pendleton suspended Olympic Development Program, elite training. After months of being told he wasn't good enough, official representatives of the highest level of athletic competition were offering him opportunities he'd only dreamed about. "I don't understand," he whispered, his voice cracking slightly. "How is this real?" Principal Edmonds reached across the table and placed a supportive hand near his. "It's real because people noticed the injustice and decided to act. It's real because your talent is undeniable. It's real because sometimes the system actually works the way it's supposed to." Dr. Asante pulled out official documents bearing Olympic Committee seals. "Tobias, this placement comes with full scholarship opportunities to any of 12 partnered universities. You'll train with current Olympic athletes. You'll have access to world-class facilities, nutrition programs, sports medicine, and coaching. Most importantly, you'll be competing at the level your talent deserves." Tobias felt his eyes begin to blur. Years of quiet endurance, of being told he wasn't enough, of watching lesser athletes receive opportunities he could only dream about, suddenly collided with this moment of complete vindication. The bright conference room seemed to pulse around him as emotions he'd kept carefully controlled for months finally broke free. "Coach Pendleton said I had attitude problems." He managed through the tightness in his throat. Darius Pemberton's expression hardened. "Coach Pendleton's career is over. His opinions about anything are now irrelevant. What matters is what happens next for you." Dr. Asante slid the official documents across the polished table. "These require your signature and your parents' signature. Once processed, you'll begin training next month at the Olympic Training Center. Your first competition as an official development athlete will be in 6 weeks." Tobias stared at the papers, his name printed in official typeface beside Olympic Committee logos. The surreal nature of the moment made everything feel like it was happening to someone else. This morning he'd been a high school student whose athletic dreams had been derailed by discrimination. Now he was being offered a direct path to Olympic-level competition. Outside the conference room, movement caught his attention. Through the glass walls, he could see Sawyer Pendleton walking past under security escort, carrying a cardboard box filled with personal items from his office. The man who had systematically destroyed his confidence and stolen months of proper training looked diminished and defeated. His usual arrogant posture had collapsed into something that resembled shame. Their eyes met briefly through the glass. Pendleton's expression showed a mixture of bitterness and recognition of complete professional destruction. Tobias felt no satisfaction in the moment, only a profound sense that justice was finally asserting itself after too long a delay. Dr. Asante noticed the exchange. "Mr. Pendleton's discriminatory practices have ended multiple promising athletic careers. Your case was simply the most thoroughly documented. His termination will likely trigger additional investigations at his previous schools." The conference room door opened, and Soojin Kim appeared with several other students behind her. Principal Edmonds had apparently given permission for supporters to gather. Soojin's face showed pure joy mixed with vindication. She had risked significant social consequences to document the discrimination, and now her courage was bearing fruit. "We heard the news," she said simply, her smile brighter than the overhead lighting. More students appeared in the hallway outside, word spreading through the school's social networks at digital speed. Tobias could see phones being pulled out, messages being typed, calls being made. His story was becoming public. But now it was a story of triumph rather than injustice. Dr. Asante stood, his blue suit commanding attention. "Tobias, I need to emphasize something important. This opportunity exists because of your talent, but also because of your character. Facing discrimination with dignity while continuing to improve shows exactly the kind of person we want representing American athletics at the highest level. The weight of the moment finally settled fully into Tobias's consciousness. Olympic development program, world-class training, university scholarships, competition against elite athletes. Everything he had dreamed about during those early morning training sessions with Darius was not only possible, but officially guaranteed. He looked around the sunlit conference room at the faces of people who had fought for his future when he didn't even know the battle was being waged. Principal Edmonds in her authoritative red blazer, Dr. Asante in his official blue suit, Darius Pemberton and Coach Faraty representing the coaching community that valued talent over prejudice, Soo-Jin Kim and his fellow students who had refused to accept injustice as normal. "When do I start?" he asked, his voice steady for the first time since entering the room. Dr. Asante smiled, the expression transforming his formal features. "Welcome to the Olympic Development Program, Tobias Hunt. Your real journey begins now." Through the conference room windows, the afternoon sun continued streaming through the skylights, but everything it illuminated looked completely different than it had just 1 hour earlier. Justice had finally arrived, carrying Olympic dreams in its wake. 3 months had transformed everything. The bright stadium lights blazed down on Jefferson Memorial Track, where the regional high school athletic championships were about to crown new legends. In the athlete preparation area, under brilliant fluorescent lighting, Tobias Hunt adjusted his official Olympic Development Program tracksuit. The deep blue jacket with gold trim represented everything he dreamed of, everything that had once seemed impossible when Coach Sawyer Pendleton cut him from his own school team. Darius Pemberton approached, clipboard in hand, wearing his new official coaching credentials on a lanyard that caught the overhead lights. His blue coaching jacket bore the Olympic Development Program logo, a far cry from their secret dawn training sessions just months ago. His muscular frame moved with the confidence of someone who had not only competed at the highest levels, but now guided the next generation toward those same heights. "How you feeling, champion?" Darius asked, his voice carrying the calm assurance that had helped Tobias through countless training sessions. Tobias stretched his legs, the movement fluid and powerful. His green tank top and black racing shorts felt different now. Not just practice gear, but the uniform of someone with official recognition, someone whose talent was finally acknowledged by the people who mattered most. Ready to show them what we've been working on. In the stands, a celebration was already underway. Soo-Jin Kim had organized what she called the Justice Squad, a cheering section that included everyone who had supported Tobias through his darkest moments. Principal Harriet Edmonds sat prominently in her red blazer, beaming with pride at seeing one of her students succeed despite institutional barriers. Coach Luciana Ferretti wore her bright red coaching jacket, having driven 3 hours from her own school to witness this moment. Dr. Carlton Asante occupied a special section reserved for Olympic Committee officials, his professional blue suit immaculate under the stadium lights. Several other scouts sat nearby, notebooks ready, timing devices synchronized. These were the people who determined athletic futures, and they were all here for Tobias. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're approaching the boys' 100-meter final." The announcer's voice boomed across the packed stadium. In lane 4, representing the Olympic Development Program Special Invitation category, we have Tobias Hunt. The cheers from the Justice Squad drowned out everything else. Soo-Jin Kim stood up, waving a homemade sign that read, "Speed of Justice," while Principal Edmonds applauded enthusiastically. Coach Ferretti whistled through her fingers, a sound that cut through the stadium noise. Tobias walked to his blocks, and the noise faded to background whisper. This was the zone he'd learned to find during those early morning training sessions with Darius, when the world was quiet and only speed mattered. He glanced up at the stands one more time, catching Dr. Asante's encouraging nod. The other runners looked fast, confident, well-trained, but none of them had traveled the journey Tobias had walked. None of them had been told they weren't good enough while clocking times that should have made headlines. None of them had trained in secret, building strength from systematic exclusion. Runners, take your mark. Tobias settled into his starting position, feeling the familiar tension in his muscles. 3 months of professional training had refined every movement, every reaction, every explosive moment of acceleration that would determine the next 10 seconds of his life. Set. The stadium went silent. 20,000 people holding their breath. In the stands, Soojin Kim gripped Principal Edmonds' hand. Darius Pemberton watched through the viewfinder of his timer, finger poised to capture the moment that would justify everything they'd believed about Tobias's potential. The starting gun cracked like thunder. Tobias exploded from the blocks with perfect form, his body uncoiling like a spring that had been compressed for years. By 20 meters, he was even with the field. By 40 meters, he had pulled slightly ahead. At 60 meters, there was daylight between him and the closest competitor. In the stands, the Justice Squad was on their feet, screaming. Dr. Asante leaned forward, his stopwatch clicking as Tobias Hunt demolished not just the competition, but every doubt that had ever been cast about his abilities. 80 meters, 90 meters. Tobias was flying now, his form perfect, his speed beyond what even Darius had seen in training. The finish line approached like destiny finally arriving. He crossed the line with his arms raised, not in celebration, but in pure release of everything he'd carried for so long. The electronic board flashed his time, 9.85 seconds, a new high school record. A time that would have made him the fastest high schooler in the state even 3 months ago, when Coach Pendleton was telling everyone he wasn't good enough for the team. Darius Pemberton vaulted the fence, separating the coaching area from the track, his clipboard forgotten as he swept Tobias into a fierce hug. "You did it, son. You did more than anyone thought possible." The Justice Squad poured down from the stands, led by Soojin Kim, who was crying and laughing simultaneously. Principal Edmonds moved with dignified speed, her red blazer bright under the stadium lights as she approached her vindicated student. Coach Ferretti wasn't far behind, shaking her head in amazement at the performance she'd just witnessed. Dr. Asante made his way through the crowd, his professional demeanor cracking into genuine emotion. "Tobias, that was extraordinary. We have college scouts here tonight who are going to be very interested in speaking with you." 200 miles away, in the break room of Morrison's Sporting Goods, Sawyer Pendleton watched the race replay on the store's small television. His orange employee polo and khaki pants were a far cry from the coaching attire he'd worn with such authority just months ago. The other employees had gone home, leaving him alone with the footage of the athlete he'd dismissed. The television showed Tobias Hunt's victory lap, his new personal record flashing repeatedly on the screen. The commentators were already talking about Olympic potential, about a young man who had overcome obstacles to achieve greatness. They mentioned the investigation that had exposed discriminatory practices in high school athletics, the coaching changes that had resulted, the nationwide discussion about ensuring equal opportunities for all athletes. Pendleton's hand trembled as he reached for the remote to change the channel. But every sports station was covering the story. Tobias Hunt's record-breaking performance was just the beginning. The real story was about justice delayed but not denied, about talent that could not be suppressed no matter how systematic the opposition. Back at Jefferson Memorial Track, the award ceremony was underway. Tobias Hunt stood on the highest step of the podium, the gold medal heavy around his neck. The national anthem played while cameras flashed, capturing the moment when years of hard work and perseverance finally received their due recognition. Ingrid Larson watched from the press section, her red blazer professional under the bright lights as she finished her follow-up article. Her investigative series about discrimination in high school athletics had sparked congressional hearings, policy changes, and a nationwide examination of how young athletes were being evaluated and selected. Tobias Hunt's story had become the catalyst for systematic reform. "This is just the beginning," Dr. Asante told the gathered media after the ceremony. Tobias Hunt represents not just exceptional athletic ability, but the importance of ensuring that every young person gets a fair opportunity to pursue their dreams. The celebration continued long into the night, but the real victory had already been achieved. In coaching offices across the country, the Tobias Hunt case was being studied as an example of what happened when discrimination masqueraded as legitimate evaluation. New oversight protocols were being implemented. Diverse coaching staffs were being hired. The systematic changes that Tobias had unknowingly sparked were already protecting other young athletes from experiencing what he had endured. 1 month later, Tobias Hunt received his official invitation to the Olympic trials. The letter arrived at his home on a sunny afternoon, delivered by a courier who waited while Tobias opened it with his family gathered around. When he read the words aloud, confirming his qualification for the most elite level of American athletics, his mother cried tears of joy that had been building for years. Darius Pemberton was there too, no longer just a mentor, but officially recognized as one of the top developmental coaches in the country. His success with Tobias had led to offers from major universities and Olympic training centers, but he had chosen to stay local, working with the Olympic Development Program to identify and nurture young athletes who might otherwise be overlooked. The final scene of Tobias's transformation took place at the Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs. Under bright mountain sunshine, he trained alongside established Olympic athletes. His green training shirt and black shorts, now familiar sights on the most elite track in America. His times continued dropping, his form continued improving, and his confidence grew with each session. Sojin Kim visited during her spring break, documenting his progress for the school newspaper that had now expanded into a regional publication focused on social justice in athletics. Principal Edmonds came for the opening ceremonies of his first major international competition, wearing her ceremonial red blazer and beaming with pride at seeing how far her support had helped carry him. The story that began with an unjust cut from a high school track team had become something much larger. Tobias Hunt's individual triumph had exposed systematic problems and sparked nationwide reform. His speed on the track was matched by the velocity of change he had unknowingly set in motion. As he crossed the finish line in his first Olympic trial race, setting yet another personal record, Tobias Hunt realized that his greatest victory wasn't measured in seconds or hundredths of seconds. It was measured in the young athletes who would never face the discrimination he had endured, in the coaching positions now filled by people who evaluated talent without bias, in the systematic changes that ensured speed and determination would always be recognized regardless of who possessed them. The boy, who had been told he wasn't good enough, had become the man who made sure those words would be harder to say to the next generation. His victory lap had become a victory for justice itself. You just heard a story that history tried to overlook. If it stayed with you, take a second to stand with it. Subscribe, share, and help us keep telling the stories that deserve light, not silence.